Listen carefully, because what I'm about to say is something most people will never allow themselves to truly understand. Not because it's complicated, but because it forces you to face something uncomfortable, something real. Most people are not living their own life. They are living a pattern, a system they didn't create, a structure they didn't question, and a reality they never truly chose. From the moment you were born, everything was already prepared for you, not in an obvious way, not like a prison with walls, but something much more subtle, something invisible. You were taught what is normal. You were taught what is safe. You were taught what you should aim for, and slowly, without even realizing it, you accepted it. You didn't question it, because nobody around you questioned it either. Think about that. If everyone around you is following the same path, it doesn't feel like a system. It feels like life. But that's the illusion, because when something is repeated long enough, it becomes invisible. Wake up, go to school, follow instructions, don't question authority, fit in, be realistic. These are not random ideas. These are patterns. And over time, those patterns become your beliefs, and your beliefs become your reality. And once that happens, you don't even feel controlled anymore. You feel normal. That is the system, not control through force, but control through agreement. Because the most powerful system is the one you don't realize you're inside. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Most people know something is wrong. They feel it. Late at night, when everything is quiet, when there are no distractions, there's a moment where they ask themselves, is this really it? But they don't stay in that thought long enough, because thinking leads to awareness, and awareness leads to responsibility, and responsibility is something most people avoid. So what do? They distract themselves. They scroll, they watch, they consume, they fill every silent moment with noise, because silence forces you to face reality, and reality is uncomfortable. Now listen carefully. People think they are trapped because they have no options. That is not true. They are trapped because they choose comfort. Every single day, comfort is not just a feeling. It's a mechanism. It keeps you where you are. It tells you, don't risk it. Stay safe. Be realistic. And slowly, you begin to accept a life that doesn't fulfill you, not because you want it, but because it feels easier. And the longer you stay there, the harder it becomes to leave. Because comfort builds chains, not physical ones, mental ones. You get used to things, a routine you don't enjoy, a job that drains you, a life that feels repetitive, and your brain says, this is fine. But deep down, you know it's not. And that feeling never goes away. You can ignore it. You can suppress it. You can distract yourself from it. But it stays there, waiting, because it's the truth. And truth doesn't disappear. Now here's something most people don't want to admit. The system doesn't need to trap you, because you stay in it. By choice. Not a conscious choice, but a repeated one. Every time you avoid discomfort. Every time you choose safety over growth. Every time you silence that inner voice. You reinforce the same life. And that's how the loop continues. You wake up, repeat, distract, sleep, again, and again, and again. Years pass, but nothing changes. And one day, you realize something terrifying. You didn't build your life. You followed it. And the worst part? You knew, but you didn't act. Not because you couldn't, but because you were afraid. Not of failure, but of uncertainty. Because the moment you step outside the system, everything becomes unclear. There are no guarantees, no clear instructions, no validation. And most people are addicted to certainty. They want to know what happens next. They want to feel safe. They want to avoid risk, even if that means living a life they don't truly want. Think about that. People will accept years of dissatisfaction just to avoid a moment of uncertainty. That is the real trap, not the system itself, but the fear of leaving it. And the system knows that. It doesn't need to stop you. It just needs to make sure you never start. Now let's go deeper, because what keeps people trapped is not just comfort. It's not just fear. It's conditioning. You've been trained your entire life, not in an obvious way, not like someone telling you directly, stay small. No, it's much more subtle. It's in the way you were rewarded. It's in the way you were corrected. It's in the way you were judged. When you followed the rules, you were praised. When you questioned too much, you were pushed back. Slowly, you learned something. Not consciously, but deeply. You learned that fitting in is safer than standing out. And from that moment, you started adjusting yourself. You started thinking, what is acceptable? What will people approve of? Instead of asking, what do I actually want? And that's where most people lose themselves. Not in one big moment, but in small decisions, repeated over time. They stop expressing their real thoughts. They stop taking risks. They stop exploring possibilities. And they start living within boundaries. Boundaries they didn't create. Now here's the problem. The longer you stay inside those boundaries, the more real they feel. Until one day, you don't even see them anymore. They become invisible. And when something is invisible, you don't question it. You accept it. That's how powerful conditioning is. It doesn't control you by force. It controls you by shaping what you believe is possible. And once you believe something is impossible, you stop trying. Not because you failed, but because you never started. Now think about this. How many things have you not done? Not because you couldn't, but because you assumed you couldn't? How many opportunities did you ignore because they felt too risky? How many times did you hold yourself back because of what others might think? That's not freedom. That's invisible limitation. And most people live their entire lives inside those limitations without ever realizing it. Now let's talk about something deeper. Identity. Because your identity is one of the strongest forces controlling your life. You don't act randomly. You act based on who you believe you are. If you see yourself as someone who plays it safe, you will avoid risk. If you see yourself as someone who is not ready, you will wait. If you see yourself as someone who can't, you won't even try. And the problem is, most people never chose their identity. It was built over time, through experiences, through feedback, through repetition. Someone told you something once, and you believed it. Then life reinforced it. And now, it feels like truth. But it's not truth. It's programming. And once you understand that, everything changes. Because if your identity was created, it can also be changed. But here's the part most people don't like. Changing your identity requires discomfort. It requires stepping into something unknown. And we already know. Most people avoid that. So they stay the same. Not because they have to, but because it feels easier. Now let's go even deeper. Let's talk about time. Because time is the silent factor in all of this. The system doesn't rush you. It doesn't need to. It just keeps you busy. Day after day, week after week, year after year. And while you're focused on small tasks, small problems, small distractions, your life is passing, slowly, quietly, and before you realize it, years are gone. Not because something dramatic happened, but because nothing happened. That's the danger. Not pain, not struggle, but stagnation. Because pain pushes you to change, but comfort keeps you where you are, and time makes that permanent. Now here's something most people will never admit. They are not just trapped, they are participating. They wake up and repeat the same actions, not because someone forces them, but because it's familiar, and familiarity feels safe, even if it's slowly destroying potential. And that's the real tragedy. Not that people are controlled, but that they never discover what they could have been, because they never stepped outside of what they were told to be. And once you see that, you can't ignore it anymore, because now you know, and knowing comes with a cost, the cost of awareness. Because once you see the system, you have two choices: go back to comfort, or face reality. And most people go back, not because they are weak, but because the truth is heavy, and carrying it requires strength. Now this is where everything changes, because at this point, you can't say you don't see it anymore. You feel it, you understand it, and once you reach this level of awareness, there is no going back to ignorance. You can go back to the routine, you can go back to the system, you can go back to the same life, but it will never feel the same again, because now, you know, and knowing creates tension, a tension between what is and what could be, and that tension is where most people break, because it forces a decision: stay the same, or change. And change is where everything becomes real, not in theory, not in thoughts, but in action. And action is what most people avoid, because action removes excuses. You can think about change forever, you can talk about it, you can imagine it, but the moment you act, you expose yourself to failure, to judgment, to uncertainty. And that's why most people stay where they are, not because they don't want more, but because they are not willing to face what comes with it. Now listen carefully. Freedom is not comfortable. Freedom is not easy. Freedom does not feel safe. Freedom is responsibility. Responsibility for your decisions. Responsibility for your direction. responsibility for your life. And most people don't want that. They say they want freedom, but what they actually want is comfort with better conditions. They want the same system, just slightly improved. Less stress, more money, more convenience, but still predictable, still safe, still controlled. That's not freedom. That's a more comfortable version of the same cage. And the system knows that. It doesn't need to trap everyone completely. It just needs to keep them satisfied enough not to leave. Now think about your own life. Be honest. How many decisions have you made based on safety? How many times did you choose the easier option instead of the right one? How many times did you silence your instincts because it felt uncomfortable to follow them? That's where the system lives. Not outside of you. Inside your decisions. Inside your habits. Inside your patterns. And that means something important. You are not powerless. Because if the system lives in your patterns, you can change it. Not overnight. Not instantly. But gradually. Through awareness. Through action. Through repetition. Now here's the truth most people avoid. Nothing changes until you change. Not your environment. Not your situation. You. Because the system adapts to you. If you stay passive, it keeps you passive. If you stay comfortable, it keeps you comfortable. If you stay distracted, it keeps you distracted. But the moment you start changing your behavior, everything starts shifting. Not because the system disappears, but because you stop playing by its rules. And that's where real power begins. Not in control over others, but in control over yourself. Your attention, your focus, your decisions. Because once you control those, you control your direction. And direction is everything. Now here's the final truth. Most people will hear something like this and do nothing. Not because they didn't understand, but because understanding is not enough. It never was. Execution is everything. And execution requires courage. Courage to be different. Courage to be misunderstood. Courage to walk a path without guarantees. And that's where most people stop. Because they are waiting. Waiting for the right time. Waiting for certainty. Waiting for confidence. But none of those things come first. They come after you move. After you act. After you step into the unknown. That's how it works. Not before. And the longer you wait, the stronger the system becomes. Because time is always moving. And if you don't move with intention, you drift into routines, into habits, into patterns, until one day, you look back and realize something painful. You had the chance. You saw the truth. You felt it. But you stayed the same. And that is the real cost. Not failure, but regret. Regret of not trying. Regret of not moving. Regret of not becoming who you could have been. And once that moment comes, you can't undo it. Because time doesn't go backwards. So the question is not, do you understand this? The question is, what are you going to do with it? Because now, you see the system. You feel the patterns. You recognize the loop. And that means, you have a choice. Stay where you are. Or step into something unknown. Something uncomfortable, but real. And that decision is yours. Always was.